This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jill Newbrunner. Here are tonight's top stories from East Asia. South Korea has summoned the Russian ambassador in Seoul to convey the government's displeasure about the reported deployment of thousands of North Korean soldiers to Russia's war in Ukraine. At the same time, South Korea welcomes British Foreign Secretary David Lammy, with security and strategic dialogue high on the agenda. China accuses the US and Canada of undermining peace by sailing naval ships through the Taiwan Strait, dismissing Washington's assertion of rights to freedom of navigation on the high seas. Also, we bring you reaction to a call by the CEO of Aramco, who told CNA International plans to transition away from fossil fuels to renewable energy are failing.
Many countries are only at the start of their development journey. Trying to force an unworkable, unaffordable transition plan on them will only threaten their economic progress.
China has high ambitions to explore our closest planetary bodies and beyond. From a lunar base to searching for extraterrestrial life, we're going to be taking a look at Beijing's Star Trek. South Korea has summoned the Russian ambassador in Seoul to protest what it called the dispatch of North Korean troops to Russia for deployment in Ukraine. Now, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol's office said Mr. Yoon and NATO chief Mark Rutte share serious concern after discussing the issue today.
북한이 러시아의 침략 전쟁에 가담한 것은 유엔 결의 위반이며 국제사회로부터 비난받아야 할 불법적 행위입니다. 또한 우리 국가 안보와 국민의 안전을 심각하게 위협하는 행위입니다.
The Kremlin has sidestepped the issue, declining to directly answer a question on whether North Korean troops will be going to fight in Ukraine. Spokesperson Dmitry Peskov instead insists on Moscow's sovereign right to develop ties with Pyongyang in all areas, adding that Russia's cooperation with North Korea is not directed against any third country. China, an ally of Moscow and Pyongyang, has weighed in on the dispute.
对于乌克兰危机，中方的立场是一贯的、明确的，希望各方推动缓和局势，致力于政治解决。
South Korea's National Intelligence Service revealed these satellite images last week, alleging that North Korea had shipped 1,500 Special Forces troops to Russia's Far East. Now, Seoul's spy agency also claiming to have detected Russian naval vessels moving Pyongyang's soldiers to Vladivostok, and that these forces have been supplied with Russian military uniforms, weapons, and false identification documents ahead of being deployed for combat. Well, Seoul did receive a visit from an ally at these tense times on the Korean peninsula. British Foreign Secretary David Lammy is in the South Korean capital, meeting his counterpart. The two sides have been discussing security cooperation, especially after those reports of North Korean soldiers in Russia.
I'm very, very pleased to continue and build on our important global strategic partnership and to be here in person with you at this time.
In a geopolitical landscape where the security of Europe and the Indo-Pacific are increasingly intertwined by the day, as illustrated by the recent developments on the Korean Peninsula and Ukraine, including deployment of North Korean troops to Russia, we must work together as trusted partners bound by shared values.
Well, let's bring in Ollie Barrett, joining us live from London with more on this story. Ollie, how significant was the meeting between the two men, given the recent geopolitical developments, particularly that story we've just been talking about, the alleged deployment of troops to buffer Moscow's war effort in Ukraine?
Indeed, it does come at a very significant moment indeed. And David Lammy and the UK Foreign Office have been referencing those reports. We've been hearing David Lammy describe it as a stark reminder of the interconnectedness of conflict, is how he's been putting this as he visits South Korea. He says, David Lammy, North Korea is supporting Russia and prolonging conflict on Europe's borders. He also talks, David Lammy, about what he describes as their illegal weapons of mass destruction program, which he says threatens national security. So clearly an opportune moment for this visit from David Lammy. It also comes off the back, of course, of his visit on Friday and Saturday to China. And during that visit to China, we're told by David Lammy in the UK Foreign Office that he also urged China not to support Russia's conflict inside Ukraine and its ongoing invasion. So all of this coming, as I say, at an opportune time for David Lammy, insisting that he will be showing that the UK is standing by one of its key regional allies.
That aside, the fact is Britain is thousands of kilometres away. What do officials in London feel they can do, they can contribute if geopolitical events on this side of the world deteriorate?
Well, UK officials would point to a large amount now of UK involvement in various different types of military cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region, which also comes off the back of the UK government's recent so-called tilt towards the Indo-Pacific. We've seen, for example, the AUKUS security deal and cooperation between the UK, the US and Australia in the Indo-Pacific region, but also when it comes to South Korea itself. David Lammy describing our South Korean partners, and he says that there is going to be some tangible new organisations and cooperation between the two countries. He's talking about what the Foreign Office is calling the first UK and South Korea Foreign and Defence Ministerial 2+2 dialogue. That's described by the UK as a set-piece consultation, which will further, it says, enhance cooperation on regional peace and security issues. But further to that, a so-called inaugural UK-Korea hybrid threats dialogue, which the UK says will mean that the two countries can discuss issues of what they call shared national interest and jointly improving our resilience. So UK officials would point to new areas of cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region that have come out of this particular visit, but more broadly as well. And they say that that is partly because of the ongoing tilt towards the Indo-Pacific region when it comes to issues around security and defence, but also trade and the environment and green cooperation as well, which David Lammy says are key elements of his trip to South Korea and to Indonesia before that as well.
As always, thank you so much, Ollie Barrett, live from London. Well, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol's approval rating has fallen to an all-time low. That's according to one polling company. The survey found 72.3% of respondents negatively assessed the president's performance. Just 24.1% of respondents had a positive outlook. Now, this is not the first set of bad polling numbers on Mr. Yoon's popularity. This year alone, the record low was broken 4 times. The survey by Real Meter took place at the time when the incumbent finds himself in controversies surrounding his wife. The First Lady has numerous allegations against her, including involvement in a stock price manipulation scheme and receiving a luxury bag as a bribe. Now, despite the opposition party's persistent attempts to float a bill to probe Kim, President Yoon has vetoed all actions. The opposition says the prosecution's recent decision to close the criminal case concerning Kim was proof that there is selective justice. The Chinese military has slammed the US and Canada, accusing them of undermining peace and stability after they sent warships through the Taiwan Strait. The passage of their naval vessels comes days after Beijing conducted major drills around the island. The US and its allies regularly cross through the Taiwan Strait. The People's Liberation Army said it dispatched naval forces to follow and monitor the transit of the American destroyer USS Higgins and the Canadian frigate HMCS Vancouver yesterday. It said the ships were guarded throughout the process and dealt with in accordance with the law. Taiwan's defense ministry said the U.S. and Canadian ships traveled from south to north of the strait, and the situation in the surrounding sea and airspace remained normal. Tensions have been escalating in the region after China ordered its second-largest military drills since President Lai Ching-te took office in May. Beijing deployed a record number of warplanes. The PLA says its troops are always on high alert and will resolutely defend national sovereignty and regional stability. China also lodging a protest with Myanmar after the Chinese consulate in Mandalay was hit by a blast on Saturday. The incident comes after a reported surge in anti-China sentiment on social media, after China warned rebel groups to stop fighting against the military government. China's foreign ministry today said it was deeply shocked and condemned the attack. A spokesperson said one was hurt, but called on Myanmar to, quote, go all out to catch and punish the people responsible. Coming up on East Asia tonight, China brings two key interest rates to historical lows as Beijing presses on with efforts to stimulate growth. And why the world's largest energy company says the current plans to transition to renewable sources are failing. Stay tuned for more. Welcome back. China is pressing on with efforts to revive its economy, cutting benchmark lending rates to historic lows. Its central bank had outlined last month steps to encourage households and businesses to borrow money. The Chinese banks trimmed the one-year loan prime rate by 25 basis points to 3.10%. The five-year LPR was lowered by the same margin to 3.60%. Most new and outstanding loans in China are based on the one-year LPR, while the five-year rate influences the pricing of mortgages. While larger markets had expected it, the cuts are within the range projected by the central bank. In forex trade, the yuan weakening against the greenback after the LPR was trimmed, but it's a mixed close for Greater China stocks, Shanghai ending slightly higher, Shenzhen gaining more than 1%, while the Hang Seng closing in the opposite direction with its declines exceeding 1%. The Beijing Stock Exchange is helping more small and medium-sized tech companies list as part of its plan to foster innovation. The exchange said it would help SMEs obtain financing from institutions and provide training and support. The bourse will also encourage firms to carry out merger and acquisitions, as well as enhance listings through instruments such as ordinary shares, preferred shares, and convertible bonds. SMEs make up more than 80% of the companies listed on the exchange so far. Most of these are high-tech enterprises. The 254 listed companies on the BSE have raised more than $7.5 billion since it was launched in 2021. The Beijing Stock Exchange 50 index hit a record high in early trade. It jumped more than 16% by the close. Well, Asia's stock markets are gearing up for their busiest week of listings in more than 2 years as companies rush to raise money before the U.S. election. Around 20 firms from the Asia-Pacific are listing shares this week and are expected to raise as much as $8.3 billion. Now, the heavy supply includes deals from China, India and Japan, underscoring the broad revival in share sales across the region. Among the big listings is the trading debut of Hyundai Motor India. The Korean carmaker's Indian outfit raised around $3.3 billion, making it the country's largest ever IPO. Chinese bottled water maker China Resources Beverage and autonomous driving technology firm Horizon Robotics are set to debut in Hong Kong later this week. Now, both firms raised more than $1.3 billion between them. The performance of the newly listed shares will be keenly watched by bankers, with a pipeline of new equity offerings in the region. The deal also offers insight into investor demand following years of weakness due to lackluster markets. Well, the head of the world's largest energy company says current international plans to transition away from fossil fuels to renewable energy are failing. Saudi Aramco's Amin Nasser gave several reasons, including affordability of renewables. He was speaking at the Singapore International Energy Week, where he called for the world to come up with a workable alternative that addresses the divide in the cost of transitioning between developed and less developed countries.
Planners must stop assuming the world can replace its conventional energy needs with half-baked alternatives almost overnight, particularly in the global south. This assumption is seriously discouraging investment in these crucial conventional sources. Let's be clear, all sources of energy will be required for decades to come. Planners must also abandon the belief that a single plan can meet the needs of more than 200 countries.
Mr. Nasser noted that demand for oil in Asia, and in particular the global south, is expected to continue to grow strongly as economies develop and living standards rise. Now, he said Asia is crucial to the energy transition progress as it consumes more than half of global energy supplies. But the region still relies on conventional resources for 84% of its needs, and current alternatives are mostly meeting consumption growth and not replacing that demand. Mr. Nasser says Asia's voice and priorities, like the global south, are hard to see in current transition planning, and the world is feeling its consequences. In a fireside chat with CNA's Elizabeth Neo later, he detailed what a new energy plan should encompass.
Now, you made some crucial points there, the first being Asia's voice and priorities, like the broader global south, as you said, is largely absent from the current energy transition planning. And you talked about this transition 2.0. How do you expect your ideas to be received by this so-called influential minority that has been pushing for and forecasting this drastic drop in oil use?
Asia is very important and critical. As I said, more than 50% of the world population is in Asia, 50% of the GDP, 60 to 70% of the economic growth, we are seeing it in Asia. Basically, the whole also global south matters very when it comes to energy transition, considering these are developing countries and they need to develop over time. What we are asking for is that we need to be pragmatic, and one size fits all is not going to work. What we need to tackle first is the emission, and we need to have investment to reduce our carbon footprint by using CCUS and other efficiency improvements and all of it, while we are building the renewables. We should not be shifting to something or a plan B without making sure plan A is affordable, shifting to plan B without making sure that plan B is affordable to the majority of the people. So what we need is to invest in technologies over the long term to help us reduce the cost of renewables and the new energies and hydrogens and solar and wind, to ensure that what we are availing to the masses is secure and affordable. If we don't do that, coal is going to increase. We predicted coal peaked 5 times so far, 5 times. Last year, coal increased by 2 million barrels of oil equivalent. This is how much coal increased last year. I don't think the transition is healthy, just looking at what's happening in coal alone. So affordability is an issue, security of supply is an issue. Unless you have secure and affordable, you cannot meet your sustainability.
Indeed, and you also talked about, the progress of energy transition. You're saying that it's far too slow, not equitable enough, and also too complicated. What have you seen on the ground? And given that we're not at peak oil yet, given the growing demands from the global south and also, the rising standards of living that we're seeing there, How do you expect this to play into a global forecasts? Are current forecasts perhaps still realistic then?
Let's look at the numbers because, numbers can explain everything. Today, we are at record level in oil. This year, our predictions will be 104.5. Gas increased by 70% from 2000 to today. Coal at record level at 8.7 billion tons. So all conventional energy is increasing. So we need to build the renewables. We are the biggest, the kingdom will be shifting to 50% renewable in the energy sector by 2030, 50%. So we are for that. But at the same time, our gas by 2030 will increase by 60%. More than 60%, by the way. So we need to invest in all sources of energy at the same time to make sure it is going to be affordable for the people. At the same time, we need to build the new. We need to work on technology and innovation. We need to provide, as I said, energy that is secure, affordable, and sustainable. You cannot talk about sustainability without making sure you ensure security and affordability.
Yes, and in this new energy plan that you're talking about, this energy transition plan, you say that it has to be multi-source, multi-speed, multi-dimension. In short, it cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach. So how should we then be looking at energy transition globally, whether you are from the global south or whether you are from the global north?
I think we should continue to invest in renewable and add more renewable to our grids. But at the same time, I think we can achieve much more in terms of emission reductions by introducing more efficiency in what we are doing. We need to ensure that we scale up carbon capture using storage. This is very important technology. Even under the popular net zero scenario, 25% of the reduction will come from CCUS. So we need to continue to invest on all of these. We need to identify technologies like hydrogen at a lower cost for the hard-to-abate sector because they emit 25% of what we are seeing today. 20 to 25% come from the hard-to-abate sector, which we don't have any solution for today because the cost is high. So I think depending on the economic maturity of each country, the transition will take place, but having one size fits all is not going to work because each country will look at what is acceptable based on their economic maturity and what works for them, ensuring that the energy they provide to their people is secure, affordable, and at the same time sustainable. So it will take some time, decades, as technologies scale up and develop and can be utilized to reduce the cost, but we should not ask for stop using oil and gas while the other alternative is not ready, cannot shoulder the need of energy requirement today, and the cost is high compared to what is existing today.
Very interesting. Well, let's stick on this topic because earlier CNA's Roland Lim spoke to the U.S. State Department's point man on energy security, Jeffrey Pyatt, and asked if he agreed with the Aramco chief's comments that plans to transitioning to clean energy are falling behind. Here's what Mr. Pyatt said.
I agree with Amin Nasser that we can't have a one-size-fits-all approach. Where I think we might disagree is on the importance of long-term decarbonization. And I will say, Aramco deserves credit for the investments that they are making in methane abatement, in carbon sequestration, in clean hydrogen. But we have to push that pace as fast as we can. The United States today is the world's largest oil and gas producer. Just last week, we produced more crude oil than ever before in our history. So we have an obligation ourselves to work really hard on figuring out how to produce the fossil energy that the world is going to continue to use for a period of time in the least climate damaging way possible. But we have an opportunity today because the marginal cost of clean power in most cases today is less than the marginal cost of traditional energy. So we want to push the envelope in that direction. And the imperative of doing so is the climate crisis and the importance of delivering energy for the international system in a way that's truly sustainable. But if there are two things that I have learned so clearly in this role in particular, one is there's no contradiction between energy security and energy transition. We actually can have it all. And second, we have to, if we don't deliver that energy security and the affordability, we're not going to maintain support in our democracies for the transition that our climate demands.
We can have it all, he says. Well, Roland also spoke to the Director General of International Renewable Energy Agency and asked him about how the world is progressing in trying to reach targets announced at the COP28 summit last year.
Let's talk about assessment of the clean energy transition. The UN climate change that's coming up, COP29, IRENA was tasked with monitoring of the UAE's consensus on COP28, which was that there would be tripling of renewable energy, doubling of efficiencies by 2030. How is the world doing?
Yeah, you know, that is what we are discussing. So, forgetting that 11.2 terawatt of clean energy, we need 2030. We are close to 4 terawatts today. This means that we install more than 1 terawatt per year. And also, if we establish a new record for 173 gigawatt last year, probably will increase that record this year. It's still half of what is needed. So we need to accelerate. And for accelerating, we have to tackle the structural barriers that we have. Infrastructure. We need an infrastructure that is designed for a decentralized energy system. We need a legal environment, conducive environment. The market should be designed for renewables, not anymore short-term contract, but long-term contract. No cost marginal price, but long-term price, stability we need. And also we need to reskill the workers and also the professionals. We need professionals and workers that are fitting with the new energy system that is coming.
I want to give you one more look at the stock market action. The rest of East Asian equities wrapping up the day mixed. Japan's Nikkei inched lower to end in the red after a choppy session as caution reigned ahead of domestic election. Now it's a different picture for South Korea, with the Kospi snapping 3 straight losses to close in the green down there. Taiwan's benchmark also ended higher. Coming up on East Asia tonight, China has high ambitions to explore our closest planetary bodies and beyond. From a lunar base to searching for extraterrestrial life, we take a look at Beijing's Star Trek. South Korea has summoned the Russian ambassador in Seoul to protest what it called the dispatch of North Korean troops to Russia for deployment in Ukraine. British Foreign Secretary David Lammy is in Seoul meeting South Korean officials. The sides have been discussing security cooperation, especially after reports of North Korean soldiers in Russia. The Chinese military has slammed the US and Canada, accusing them of undermining peace and stability after they sent warships through the Taiwan Strait. China is going big on space. It's just announced its first ever national space science program with the goal of becoming the next superpower by the year 2050. Now, that plan includes sending taikonauts to the moon within the next 3 years. Now, you heard that right, taikonauts. It's a play on the Chinese word for space, taikong. Now, here's how the program looks.
From sending astronauts to its own space station to bringing back rocks from the moon, China is reaching to the stars. Beijing's space program has seen a flurry of activity and breakthroughs in recent years. In June, the Chang'e 6 lunar probe brought back nearly 2,000 grams of samples from the far side of the moon, marking a historic first in astronomy. In May, China launched the Shenzhou 18 spacecraft mission to the Tiangong space station. The 3 taikonauts had with them a tank of live zebrafish. The crew have been conducting experiments to test the viability of a large closed ecosystem involving fish and algae. Nearly 6 months on, the mission is coming to an end. The Shenzhou 18 astronauts are preparing to hand over to the crew of Shenzhou 19 and return to Earth later this month. But far from the orbit of our own planet, the Tianwen-1 mission became the first Chinese probe to touch down on the surface of Mars in 2021. Beijing's hope now is to explore the giant of our solar system, Jupiter. But that's not the final chapter in China's extraterrestrial ambitions. Its ambitious plan unveiled last week sees space missions and initiatives from now till 2050, broken up into 3 stages. The country will focus primarily on its space station from now till 2027, adding 5 to 8 future missions to the current projects. In the second stage, the aim is to develop and deploy some 15 missions to build up space power. This stage would see China and possibly other countries launch a permanent research station on the moon. Beijing says more than a dozen countries and organizations have joined the project. Officials say this will help drive revolutionary breakthroughs and innovation.
总目标是梯次布局和论证实施 国家空间科学任务，统筹和强化任务驱动的基础研究，打造空间科学高水平人才队伍，不断取得具有重大国际影响力的标志性原创成果，实现空间科学高质量发展，跻身国际前列，成为空间科学强国。
Among many goals, Beijing aims to put a person on the moon before 2030, which would make China the second nation after the United States to do so. On this star trek, China has eyes set on a wide range of topics: black holes, the solar system, the search for habitable planets, and ultimately, signs of extraterrestrial life.
So much to unpack there, so let's bring in Clayton Swope, Deputy Director of the Aerospace Security Project at Center for Strategic and International Studies. Mr. Swope, hello. Now, it's an ambitious program, isn't it? What is China's end goal in its space science development program? What does it want to achieve?
It is a very ambitious plan. China is already undoubtedly the number 2 space power in the world by any way that you can measure it. In this plan, it's looking to show that it's going to be committed to being certainly trying to be the number 1 space power in science. It's working in other areas to be very strong in space and commercial and security issues, but this is just demonstrating a commitment well into the future, 25 years out to 2050, on what China is planning to do and where it's planning to put its money.
Right, so it's getting its security under control, as well as taking care of its exclusion from the ISS. The roadmap is, as we heard, split into 3 phases, including plans to launch a permanent space station on the moon. Now, take us through that roadmap. Is it a viable one, or will there be roadblocks and challenges along the way?
One thing that we should keep in mind is space is still hard. It's always hard. It's always been hard. But one thing that China has shown over the last few years is that it is making steady progress in space. So if we look at what's happened with the Chang'e moon missions, in particular the last 2, which returned samples of the moon, those were unqualified successes. China has also had success with its Tianwen-1 mission, which went to Mars. China did something on its first mission that no other country had done, which was land a rover softly on the Martian surface, and then also deploy a rover. It took the United States 21 years between those 2 achievements, and China did it on its first solo Mars mission. So by all signs of what we've seen with China's progress in space to date, particularly its civil and space exploration missions, if they're saying that they're going to be able to do this timeline, they're probably committed to doing it. And we should expect, of course, maybe stumbles along the way with technology, with timelines, but 25 years is a very long time to have some wiggle room to be able to make those goals. If we're looking very closely to their first phase, we're looking at things that China has already said they're doing, which is sending humans to the moon, establishing a permanent human presence on the moon. So these things that China has committed to already before and has been working to achieve those goals for a number of years. So those aren't new. Certainly looking out further to 2050, it is a little hazier, and we don't know precisely what that day-to-day schedule would look like. But we should have confidence that they're going to work and do everything they can to achieve those milestones.
And maybe to add one more to that list of achievements, it's on track to also launch Tianwen-3 mission to Mars. That's in 2028. And that's 2 years earlier than what they had previously planned. So if I was to characterize this space plans as a race between the US and China, who would be winning?
If we look to a race, we're often told it's a moon race 2.0 between the United States and China. In this case, the US has already been to the moon many decades ago. China would be getting there for the first time. It certainly is important for the US to have a presence on the moon, particularly if China has its own presence. But really the race to do something that is a historic first would be to return samples from Mars. And that is the Tianwen-3 mission. The US has its own Mars sample return mission. If there is a race right now, it could be a Mars race rather than a moon race. China has said that they're going to launch that mission sooner than they planned. Already, if China had kept to its original schedule, that would be faster than NASA would be able to retrieve lunar samples or Martian samples and bring them back to Earth. NASA is doing what it can to accelerate its timeline, but it's very unclear right now if it could accelerate that to get there before China does. This is a very important mission. It would be the first mission ever to bring back samples to Earth of another planet. And this is a planet that has an atmosphere. There's a chance to have evidence of life in the past. There's a lot of opportunities for science and discovery of a return of a Martian sample to Earth. Unlike lunar samples, which were extremely important of themselves, return of a Martian sample would be a huge achievement that would go down in the history of mankind.
Yeah, and I'm sure speed is not the only way to gauge progress. I want to look specifically at their technology. How advanced is their space-related technology compared to other players, US, India, Japan?
It's tough to do a one-for-one comparison on the technology. It is easy to compare the achievements. One thing that does strike me when I look at what China has been able to do is that it has been methodically ticking off boxes of milestones maybe that the United States and Soviet Union and others had achieved many years ago, many decades ago, but they're doing it without apparent major mistakes or errors. They're doing it in a way that they're demonstrating they know how to operate in space and do more. So learn from what they did the last time and develop that muscle memory on how to do things and push envelopes in space. So rather than just looking at the technology, it's important to look at what China is doing, what a space operator is learning, and how they're pushing the envelope of what they can do next time. That's something that we see the United States doing, the Soviet Union doing, certainly something that India is doing and pushing its envelope. So really, all of these countries are kind of doing the same thing, where they're taking the technologies and using those in a way to develop what they can do in space. And it's pushing the boundary, not just in the technological standpoint, but what they could do.
So interesting. Thank you so much for shedding some light on this fascinating area. Clayton Swope, he is from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Coming up on East Asia tonight, Indonesia's newly appointed cabinet ministers sworn in at the presidential palace. Prabowo Subianto has chosen 48 ministers, including allies of former President Joko Widodo. Newly inaugurated Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto has officially sworn in the country's largest cabinet since 1966. There are up to 109 members compared to 64 under his predecessor. Despite being new, the cabinet still features 17 ministers from Joko Widodo's cabinet, as well as the former president's son as vice president. The cabinet also includes politicians from a coalition of 7 parties who supported his victory in the February election. While Mr. Prabowo says the cabinet represents his pledge for a strong government, it has already received criticism for being just too large. Commentators say this could complicate bureaucracy and lengthen the policy-making process. The announcement of the new cabinet officially ends Joko Widodo's era at the helm of Indonesia. The new president, Subianto, is a former military general and had been dogged by allegations of human rights abuses for decades. Having failed twice to become president, Prabowo finally got the keys to the top office in February when he won 58% of the vote. For more, Randy Mulyanto joins us live from Jakarta. Randy, Mr. Prabowo has announced plans to take his cabinet members on a military academy retreat. Quite an unusual move, a start for the government. What can you tell us about this retreat?
Jill, the retreat is going to be held from this Friday to Sunday in Magelang in Indonesia's central Java province. It's about 500 kilometers away from Jakarta. But I think what's more significant is the location of the retreat itself. It's going to be held at a military academy, nestled in the Javanese mountain range, and these ministers will be sleeping in tents. And I think one key message that Mr. Prabowo wants to give here, wants to show to the public as well here, is basically the fact that, there is only the president's vision, not the minister's vision. So basically everything comes from the top. This is something that the government wants to do, basically when it comes to how the leadership itself basically comes from the top. So again, this is important as the government wants to be unified here.
Well, that will be a lot of tense. Now, in his inauguration, Mr. Prabowo stressed the importance of Indonesia's long-time non-aligned status, despite being a former defense minister. What does the new leader think the country can achieve through this policy?
That's right, Jill. I don't think the new government, at least for now, under Mr. Prabowo, will explicitly side with any of the blocs. We have to remember that Indonesia has the free and active foreign policy. Indonesia wants to engage with as many countries as possible. Even if we look back at Mr. Prabowo's inauguration speech yesterday, he said that 1,000 friends are too few, an enemy is too many. So we've also seen how Mr. Prabowo in the past basically, Mr. Jokowi in the past, has engaged with both China and the United States. For example, China with Indonesia's first high-speed rail and the United States with its military support with the US and other countries. So, and also, again, flashback to a few months back, Mr. Prabowo basically went to several countries, China, Japan, Russia, France, and more as a president-elect. So for now, we can see that as long as it aligns, it benefits Indonesia's national strategy and interests. We can see that that's going to be the strategy. But whether things will change in the future, it remains to be seen.
All right, I have to leave it there. But thank you, Randy Mulyanto, reporting live to us from Jakarta. In the face of Western sanctions, Russia has been trying to persuade its allies to adopt an alternative to the dollar for international payments. At a summit this week, the Brics nations, an alliance of major developing countries, Moscow is expected to try and convince a growing club of allies that it is immune from Western attempts to isolate it, calling for other countries to join a bid to overhaul the global financial system. Dasha Chernyshova reports.
Overturning the dominance of the US dollar. That's Russia's central aim this week at a gathering of friends in the Russian city of Kazan. The list of allies is getting longer. What used to be a club of just 5 global heavyweights, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, now includes a total of 10 members, with 34 others waiting in the queue. As momentum builds to expand this so-called counterweight bloc to the West, Russian President Vladimir Putin hopes he has the support to take on the West's dominance of the global economy.
Убежден, что действуя вместе, сплоченно, мы сможем добиться максимальной реализации экономического, инвестиционного, технологического и человеческого потенциалов наших стран, укрепить конструктивное влияние Брикс на мировые процессы, сделать мир, в котором мы живем, более безопасным и гораздо более гармоничным.
President Putin's attempt to reduce his country's dependence on the dollar for cross-border payments comes after the imposition of wide-ranging sanctions by Western countries in response to Russia's 2022 special military operation in Ukraine. The penalties, which include the freezing of foreign currency reserves and assets, have made it increasingly hard for Moscow to settle trade payments, even with its close ally, China. And it hopes its proposed alternative will solve those issues. But just like any bloc involving multiple partners, achieving a united voice on most issues remains elusive. It is also not yet clear how many countries explicitly support an alternative to a dollar-based financial system.
I think that, first of all, Brics had to learn how to sit together when twice as large countries now present in Brics body. And previously of any arrangement, the major points should be settled down. First of all, it's alternative payment system.
Perhaps conscious that building support for an alternative to the dollar might be challenging, Moscow has an interim proposal, a so-called bridging payment system for digital transactions set in individual national currencies that would be immune from Western control. The idea hinges on linking commercial banks through the central banks of Brics member nations and involves transferring digital tokens backed by national currencies using blockchain technology. This would guarantee the secure exchange of those currencies, circumventing the need for dollar backing altogether. Some newcomers to the club, like Egypt, are already exploring similar bilateral payment partnerships.
I mean, some of the Brics countries, they started such models of payment bilaterally. So we find China, Russia, India, Russia, and so on. Even China, United Arab Emirates, and so on. In Egypt, we are starting this with China as well. So, I mean, this is the trend now. This is the trend. And this is an important step to be taken by the Brics.
BRICS member states account for nearly 30% of global GDP and 45% of the world's population. But they also have divergent, and at times competing objectives and visions for the future. The leaders' summit in Kazan, at the very least, seen as an inflection point in the bloc's development. But whether it can become a real force or remains more of a talking shop remains to be seen. Dasha Chernysova, CNA, Moscow.
And before we go, a reminder of our top story. South Korea has summoned the Russian ambassador in Seoul to protest what it called the dispatch of North Korean troops to Russia for deployment in Ukraine. The South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol's office said Mr. Yoon and NATO Chief Mark Rutte share serious concerns after discussing the issue today. The Kremlin has sidestepped the issue, declining to directly answer a question on whether North Korean soldiers will be going to fight in Ukraine. That's it for East Asia Tonight this Monday. Don't forget headlines anytime at cna.asia. Plus, we're on Facebook, YouTube and X. Bye-bye.